This is the Troll Patrol, live with Justin FREAKIN.
Welcome to the Troll Patrol, live. It is day number 3 of the Senate trial in the impeachment of Donald J. Trump. The Democrats have already gotten started with their presentation for the day. Usually, they slack a little bit, and they're a little late getting started, but they were right on time this morning, so let's go ahead and pick it up.
A civil war. Get ready. An analysis found that members of civil war quadrupled on Parler in the hour.
So this is the final day of Democratic testimony in the trial. Tomorrow, the Trump's lawyers will make their case.
Insurrectionists holding Confederate flags and brandishing weapons cheered the president's very words.
The testimony from the Democrats so far has been incredibly damning. However, Lindsey Graham got on Fox News last night and said each day the Democrats' case is falling apart. But of course, Lindsey Graham is not speaking to anyone that's actually watching the proceedings. He's speaking to people
heard them chanting,
who don't pay any attention.
And as the crowd chanted at the rally, the crowd at the Capitol made clear who they were doing this for. They also chanted, "Fight for Trump."
So this is the start of another 8-hour day. They did wrap up about an hour early yesterday. So we're probably going to go till around 6 or 7, 8 o'clock
They were doing this
Eastern time
for
tonight.
Mr. Trump. They were following his instructions. They said he had invited them. And in fact, as we heard, he had invited them. As one man explained on a live stream he taped from inside the Capitol, quote, "Our president wants us here. We wait and take orders from our president." Footage from inside the Capitol shows when the insurrectionists first got into the building and confronted police, the mob screamed at the officers that they were listening to President Trump.
We're outnumbered. There's a fucking million of us out there, and we are listening to Trump. You're the boss.
Literally, in his words, we are listening to Trump.
That they shouldn't even be fighting them because they believed that the commander-in-chief was ordering this. This was the person's understanding. When President-elect Biden went on television that day to demand an end to the siege, one woman asked this.
Does he not realize President Trump called us to siege the place?
The examples of these types of comments are endless. Don't worry, I won't play all of them. But it wasn't just the words of the insurrectionists that proved that they did this in response to orders from their commander-in-chief. We can see this in the fact that they were not hiding. One rioter in a live stream at the Capitol said, quote, "He'll be happy. We're fighting for Trump."
Let's call Trump, yes! Dude, let's tell Trump what's up. Trump would be very upset. And he'd be like, no, just say we love him. We love you, bro. No, he'll be happy. What do you mean? We're fighting for Trump.
And again, this was not an isolated incident.
Oh, Baked Alaska. I'm sorry, I can't talk yet. I'm not stoned. I'm completely sober.
Trump supporters.
I really can't talk. I'm completely sober right now.
We're taking selfies, streaming live videos, and posing.
It's called state-dependent learning. If you do something
this is me. In fact,
in a certain state of mind, you always do that thing in that state of mind better. So that means me talking.
And if there were any
I do it better when I'm stoned.
After hours of prompting, when President Trump finally told the insurrectionists to go home, only then did some of them begin to listen. As you previously saw, at 4:17 p.m., Mr. Trump released a pre-recorded video saying to the mob, Go home. We love you. You're very special. Shortly after he tweeted this video, a few of the insurrectionists who had seen it could be claiming victory and telling people to go home because of Donald Trump's message and instructions. You saw earlier the insurrectionist Jacob Chansley, who told someone, quote,
The QAnon shaman.
day. A little before that video of Chansley, he said the same thing to the crowd through a bullhorn and instructed them to go home because of the video that President Trump had tweeted. Let's watch.
Today is ours. We won the day. That's why Donald Trump has asked everybody to just go home. You can look it up on his Twitter. He just did a video. It's a minute long. He asked everybody to go home.
Even after the attack, the insurrectionists made clear to law enforcement that they were just following President Trump's orders. They didn't shy away from their crimes because they thought they were following orders from the commander-in-chief, and so they would not be punished. They were wrong. After the attack, there were dozens of arrests. These were federal offenses, including assaulting the police. When law enforcement interviewed the people who were at the Capitol on January 6th, they once again said it was because the president told them to be there. Robert Sanford was seen in this widely circulated video throwing a fire extinguisher that struck a Capitol police officer outside the building.
By the way, I was just trolling a cop that was
Witness
defending
told
this
the
shit.
FBI that Sanford said he had traveled.
Talking about, well, they didn't arrest BLM, blah, 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 blah.
Group of people.
To which I pointed out, yeah, that wasn't BLM
had
burning
gone
shit
to the
down.
White House and listened to Donald J. Trump's speech, and then had followed the president's instructions and gone to the Capitol. Folks, the insurrectionists didn't just make this up. As Sanford's lawyer explained, you're being told you've got to fight like hell. Does fight like hell mean you throw things at people? Maybe. The lawyer added that his client, quote, wouldn't have been there if it weren't for the president.
Truth.
Now, Sanford wasn't the exception.
He wouldn't have been there if it wasn't for the president.
In their statements,
He wouldn't have been there if it wasn't for the entire Republican Party giving credence to their
what they had said before.
nonsense claims of election fraud.
They were there because the president told them to be. Now look, the lawyers who are saying that their clients were told to commit these acts by Mr. Trump, well, they know that putting the blame on the president doesn't exonerate their clients. They're just saying it, frankly, because that's exactly what happened. Another Trump supporter who's been federally charged is Texas real estate agent Jennifer Ryan. Now, Ms. Ryan has given many TV interviews in which she says she was only doing what the president asked her and others to do. She also recorded video before the rally talking about the mob's plans for violence. And here's what she said.
Personally, I do not feel a sense of shame or guilt from my heart from what I was doing. I thought I was following my president. I thought I was following what we were called to do.
And she thought she was following that because Republicans have repeated this big lie about election fraud.
Definitely, yes, we were going in solidarity with President Trump. President Trump
And the stupid people eat it up.
in D.C. on the 6th. So this was our way of going and stopping this deal.
If it comes down to war, guess what? I'm going to be there. We're all going to
Huh.
be up here. We're going to be breaking those windows.
Yet another Trump supporter who was arrested after breaching the Capitol, Douglas Sweet, explained in a media interview why he did it. Referring to Donald Trump, Mr. Sweet said, quote, he said, hey, I need my digital soldiers to show up on January 6th, and we all did. Some of these individuals who joined in the attack on our Capitol did so as part of violent racist groups, which have been officially condemned by our government. Daniel Goodwin is a self-proclaimed...
Yes, it was most certainly a neo-Nazi rally.
Many. On November 7th, Goodwin tweeted a picture showing the Proud Boys logo surrounded by "Stand back and stand by," and the quote, again, "Stand back and stand by," and a wave...
With a picture of Trump as his avatar.
Look closely at this slide. You are looking at an image of Goodwin's own tweet. He was such a loyal follower of President Trump that he used the president's photo as his own profile picture on Twitter. Now remember, President Trump told them to stand back and stand by at the debate. They took it as a call to arms. And when he called them to arms, they were all ready to act. They were waiting for their orders, which they got on January 6th. And Goodwin followed those orders. He stood ready as others broke into the windows at the Capitol and climbed inside. Here he is on another of the insurrectionists' live stream in one of the first floor hallways of the building. When it became clear that Donald Trump was not going to save these folks from prosecution, when it became clear that the commander-in-chief
they flipped and narked
commands that went against this country, some of his supporters even expressed regret, and they said they felt duped. Here's Jake.
They should.
Again, who we saw in a video claiming victory after the president told the rioters to go home. Earlier in the afternoon, as you'll recall, Chansley carried a spear as he breached the Capitol, entered the Senate through the gallery, and went right here onto the Senate floor. Chansley left a threatening note for Vice President Pence right there on the Senate dais. It read, quote, "It's only a matter of time. Justice is coming." On January 7th, Chansley spoke to the FBI, and he said that he came as part of a group effort with other patriots from Arizona at the request of the president that all patriots come to D.C. on January 6, 2021. On January 14th, Chansley's lawyer gave an interview to Chris Cuomo in which he said that Chansley was there, quote, "at the invitation of our president, who said he would walk down Pennsylvania Avenue with him." In fact, Chansley's lawyer now says that Chansley felt duped by the president, and he regrets what the president brought him to do. This man, who ran through our halls, who ran into this chamber, who sat right there on the dais, and who wrote a note for Vice President Pence that he was coming for him, he and those with him declared they would remove us from office if we went against Donald Trump. Now he's saying he would not have done any of that if Mr. Trump had told him not to. Chansley's not alone in his post-arrest confession that he was following the directions of Donald Trump. As more and more of these people have been charged, the confession and the regret simply cascades. More and more insurrectionists are admitting that they came at Trump's direction. When Riley June Williams, known for allegedly helping steal a laptop from Speaker Pelosi's office, appeared in court on January 21st, her lawyer said to the judge, quote, "It is regrettable that Ms. Williams took the president's bait and went inside the Capitol." Troy Smocks, who was in the Capitol riot on January 6th, posted online that day, quote, Today, President Trump told us to fight like hell. He also posted that the president, quote, " 'said that our case was a matter of national security.'" Samuel Fisher was charged with disorderly conduct and illegally being in the Capitol on January 6th. That day, before the attack on this building, he wrote on his website, quote, "Trump just needs to fire the bat signal," and quote, "then the pain comes." The lawyer for Dominic Pizzola, a leader of the Proud Boys, who was the first person to break inside the Capitol, said that President Trump effectively told his client and others, quote, "People of the country, come on down. Let people know what you think." Quote, logical thinking was, he invited us down. Pizzola's lawyer went on, "These were people acting in a way they've never acted before. And it begs the question, who lit the fuse?" End quote. On January
Never would have acted before. Bullshit.
We know who lit the fuse. Donald Trump told these insurrectionists to come to the Capitol and stop the steal. And they did come to the Capitol. And they tried to stop the certification. They came because he told them to. And they did stop our proceedings, but only temporarily, because he told them to. Have you noticed throughout this presentation the uncanny similarity over and over and over again of what all these people are saying? They said what Donald Trump said, and they echoed each other. Stand back and stand by. Stop the steal. Fight like hell. Trump sent us. We are listening to Trump. The riots that day left at least 7 people dead, more than 150 people injured, members, senators, and our staffs, all traumatized to this day. Damage and pain to our Capitol, damage and pain to Americans, damage to our police force, and damage to other nations who have always seen us as a bastion of democracy. All of these people who've been arrested and charged, they're being held accountable for their actions. Their leader, the man who incited them, must be held accountable as well. But, as I said earlier, you don't have to take my word for it that the insurrectionists acted at Donald Trump's direction. They said so. They were invited here. They were invited by the President of the United States.
To the Constitution, not your paycheck! We were invited here! We were invited! Hey, we were invited here! They swore it all together! They're leaving so you can take it! They're leaving so you can take it! We were invited by the President of the United States! Waiting on their brothers, man.
Apparently, according to people in the comment sections, the videos we've been watching have been selectively edited. Despite the fact that you can go to ProPublica and watch them in chronological order. In their entirety. I swear to God, right-wingers are fucking morons. Crisis actors. Oh, God. So we just wrapped up the first presentation of the morning. Looks like Representative Raskin is coming back to the podium. The first presentation focused on the words of the accused in their court filings after being arrested, saying that they were following orders for Donald Trump.
Senators, Representative DeGette just showed how the insurrectionists believed and understood themselves.
DeGette, I didn't know how to say it. I didn't want to fuck up her name.
Marching orders.
Representative DeGette.
In chilling detail how they were acting in perfect alignment with his political instructions and his explicit strategy to retain power. They did what he told them to do. This pro-Trump insurrection did not spring into life out of thin air. We saw how Trump spent months cultivating America's most dangerous extremist groups. We saw how he riled them up with corrosive lies and violent rhetoric, so much so that they were eager
not
for
months,
their most
years.
dangerous mission in validating the will of the people to keep Donald Trump in office. But we must remember that this was not the first time Donald Trump had inflamed and incited a mob. Trump knew that his incitement would result in violence, not only because of the thousands of violent messages that were posted all over the forums and the widespread news of preparations for violence among extremist groups and his communications on Twitter with the insurrectionists themselves. He knew it also because he'd seen many of the exact same groups he was mobilizing participate in extremist violence before.
And his rallies.
Seen clearly how his own incitement to violence and praise after the violence took place galvanized, encouraged, and electrified these extremist followers. These tactics were road tested. January 6th was a culmination of the president's actions, not an aberration from them. The insurrection was the most violent and dangerous episode so far.
Also, I learned yesterday that the Trump lawyer who likes to touch his head when he takes a drink of water is an Orthodox Jew. And for some reason, he didn't wear his yarmulke on the floor. And apparently, Jewish people have to cover their head when they eat or drink.
That took place
I knew nothing about any of this.
But his encouragement of violence against other
apparently he gave an interview where he said
long
apparently he gave an interview where he said that he didn't want to be
the incitement of violence is always dangerous, but it's uniquely intolerable when done by the president.
I can't remember how they put it,
but that's
something that he didn't want to wear it on the floor is not to cause a distraction or something. I'm like,
Trump's watch, white supremacy.
Chuck Schumer wears a yarmulke
have spread like wildfire
about half the time, I do believe.
His own Department of Homeland
So I don't know why that would have been an issue.
Homegrown terrorism, the number one threat facing Americans today.
But apparently it's not a tick or Tourette's or anything.
Inside and outside
it's some religious
begged him
shit.
to condemn extreme elements, promoting violence, and indeed civil war in America, and race war in America. He just wouldn't do it. And that's because he wanted to incite and provoke their violence for his own political gain and for his own strategic objectives. Ever since he became president, Trump revealed what he thought of political violence. For his side, he praised it and he encouraged it. Right now, I'm going to play for you just a few clips from over the years when the president's words successfully incited his supporters into assaulting his opponents.
See, the first group, I was nice. Oh, take your time. The second group, I was pretty nice. The third group, I'll be a little more violent. And the fourth group, I'll say, get the hell out of here.
That was my thought process on it, that Trump had made fun of him for the yarmulke. Or that he was afraid of appearing Jewish in front of a bunch of right-wingers.
Get him out of here. Throw him out.
That would absolutely be my guess, Scrappy.
See, the security guys, we have wonderful security guys. They said, Mr. Trump, there may be somebody with tomatoes in the audience. So if you see somebody getting ready to throw a tomato, knock the crap out.
I believe Media Winch will be joining us at some point in time.
Knock the hell. I promise you, I will.
It's still kind of early on the West Coast.
Well, we've seen these clips and many, many more like them before, but think about the brutal power and effectiveness of his words with his followers. You heard him, told his supporters to be a little more violent, and they responded to his command by literally dragging a protester across the floor at one of his campaign rallies. He cried, "Get him the hell out of here, throw him out." His supporters punched and kicked another protester as he was escorted from the hall. He told supporters to knock the hell out of people who opposed him and promised to pay the legal fees of the assailants. Time after time, he encouraged violence. His supporters listened, and they got the message. But it wasn't just Trump's encouragement of violence that conditioned his supporters in this insurrection. On
But he didn't have a yarmulke on.
His explicit sanctioning of the violence after.
It was explained to me that he touched his head because he didn't have the yarmulke on.
Some of those incidents.
And they have to have their head covered or some shit.
Supporters who had assaulted a black protester.
I don't mean to. Oh, I can see that. I can see that.
But we've had a couple that were really violent.
That makes perfect sense.
When I said, like to bang him, that was a very vicious, he was a guy who was swinging, very loud, and then started swinging at the audience. And you know what? The audience.
So I kind of feel bad for making fun of him for
it was very, very
religious reasons. But then again, religion is also really weird.
And the audience hit back. And that's what we need, a little bit more of.
We'll talk to you about that later.
Yeah, but there's not going to be time. I'm just curious if you have the act
speak
right
with
now.
Shane, please.
But you don't.
Oh yeah, he body slammed a reporter.
You guys, the last time that came in here, you did the same thing. Get the hell out of here. Jesus. Get the hell out of here.
Yeah, I'm relaying secondhand knowledge as well. Someone telling me about the traditions.
You last guy did the same damn
But
thing.
hopefully we can piece this together somehow. Apparently he gave a interview where he said he didn't want to wear the yarmulke.
You understand that? Never. Any guy that can do a body slam, he's my kind.
And that Greg Giaforte won. He won. I don't know if he's still in Congress because that was a couple of years ago.
Replace us! Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!
I'm not even saying we're non-violent. I'm saying that fucking we didn't aggress. We did not initiate force against anybody. We're not non-violent. We'll fucking kill these people if we have to.
Well, I do think there's blame, yes.
But their argument is like they have to be violent because Antifa is violent.
I think there's blame on both sides. And you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
So just in case you didn't catch all of that, the president praised a Republican candidate who assaulted a journalist as my kind of guy. He said there were, quote, very fine people on both sides when the
neo-Nazi rally.
Klansmen and Proud Boys.
Literally a neo-Nazi rally.
The great city of Charlottesville and killed Heather Heyer. And he said that an attack on a black protester at one of his rallies was very, very appropriate. Does that sound familiar? Listen to how President Trump responded when asked about his own conduct on January the 6th.
So if you read my speech, and many people have done it, it's been analyzed, and people thought that what I said was totally appropriate.
Totally appropriate. A perfect speech. He really said that. I think that's the next line. It was a perfect speech. Just like he said, it was a perfect call. Holy shit.
Totally appropriate was how he characterized his incitement on January 6th. Meaning that, of course, if given the chance, he would gladly do it again, because why would he not engage in totally appropriate conduct? An examination of his past statements makes it clear that when Donald Trump tells a crowd, as he did on January 6th, fight like hell, or you won't have a country anymore, he meant
what's up,
for them
Smokey?
to fight like hell. On January 6th, that became clear to all of America. Now, let's consider the events, senators, that took place last year in Michigan, where President Trump demonstrated his willingness and his ability to incite violence against government officials who he thought were getting in his way. When responding to extremist plots in Michigan, Trump showed he knew how to use the power of a mob to advance his political objectives. Beginning in March, Trump leveled attacks on Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer for the coronavirus policies in her state. On March 17th, the day after Governor Whitmer pushed the federal government to better support the states on COVID-19, Trump criticized her handling of the pandemic, tweeting, "Failing Michigan governor must work harder and be much more proactive. We are pushing her to get the job done. I stand with Michigan." On March 27th, he added, "I love Michigan. One of the reasons we're doing such a great job for them during this horrible pandemic, yet your governor, Gretchen Whitmer, is way in over her head. She doesn't have a clue."
I hadn't heard that one.
Everyone for her own.
Whitmer? What the fuck is that supposed to mean?
By April,
Whitmer.
Trump's rhetorical attacks and name-calling turned to calls for mass mobilization.
He's trying to call her a half-wit?
This was a sign of things to come. On April 17th, 2020, he tweeted, quote, "Liberate Michigan." Not even 2 weeks later, on April 30th, his supporters marched on the Michigan State Capitol in Lansing. They stormed the building. Trump's marching orders were followed by aggressive action on the ground.
We have a right. Let us in.
That's wittier than I would expect from Trump.
You policemen are all cowards! You betrayed us! The police have betrayed the people! Lock her up! Lock her up! Lock her up! Lock her up! Lock her up!
As the video shows, these militant protesters showed up ready to take a violent stand. They came armed and tightly packed themselves into the building with no regard, of course, for social distancing.
Of course
this
not.
This Trump-inspired mob may indeed look familiar to you. Confederate battle flags, MAGA hats, weapons, camo army gear.
Hawaiian shirts.
Like the insurrectionists who showed up and invaded this chamber on January 6th. The siege of the Michigan State House was effectively a state-level dress rehearsal for the siege of the U.S. Capitol that Trump incited on January 6th.
And they did it in Oregon, too.
Of the coming insurrection. President Trump's response to these two events was strikingly similar. Following the armed siege in Lansing, President Trump refused to condemn the attacks on the Michigan Capitol or denounce the violent lawbreakers. Instead, he did just the opposite. He upheld the righteousness of his violent followers' cause, and he put pressure on the victim of the attack to listen to his supporters. The day after the mob attack in Lansing, Trump told Governor Whitmer to negotiate with the extremists, tweeting that the governor should just, quote, "give a little" to the violent men who had stormed the Capitol, threatening not only the stability
These
of
are
the
very
Michigan
good people
but her own life.
That stormed
As
the
you
state
can see,
capitol.
He tweeted, "The governor of Michigan should give a little and put out the fire. These are very good people, but they are angry. They want their lives back again safely. See them, talk to them, make a deal." The president says heavily armed extremists carrying Confederate battle flags and pushing past police to overtake the Michigan State House chamber are very good people and just negotiate with them. It's clear he doesn't think that they're at fault in any way at all. But April 30th wasn't the only time Trump supporters stormed the Michigan Capitol. Emboldened by his praise and his encouragement and support, they escalated again. Governor Whitmer refused to capitulate to the president's demand to negotiate with them. 2 weeks later, on May 14th, Trump's mob again stormed the state capitol.
Get Emma chocolate milk.
This time, as you can see here, one man brought a doll with a noose around the neck, foreshadowing the appearance of the large gallows erected outside of this building, downstairs from here on January 6th, as the crowd chanted, And I still can hear the
What a
words ring in my
fantastic
ear.
picture they
Hang
caught of
Mike
that guy,
Pence.
too.
Hang
The face
Mike
he was
Pence.
making.
Hang Mike Pence. Over the coming months, even after a crowd threatening Governor Whitmer stormed the Capitol, Trump continued to assail her in public. At a rally in Michigan on September 10th, Trump whipped up the crowd against Governor Whitmer, saying, quote, she doesn't have a clue about reopening her own state's economy. The crowd cheered. Then, on October 8th, the precise
She doesn't have a
consequences
clue.
of the president's incitement to violence were revealed to the whole world. Look at this. 13 men were arrested by the FBI for plotting to storm the Michigan State Capitol building, launch a civil
Coming from
war,
one of the most clueless
kidnap
motherfuckers
Governor
walking the
Whitmer,
planet.
transport her to Wisconsin, and then try and execute her. This was an assassination conspiracy, a kidnapping conspiracy. Look at the language that they used. In the charging document, the FBI reported that one of the conspirators said he needed, quote, 200 men to storm the Capitol building and take political hostages, including the governor. The suspect called it a snatch and grab, man.
200 men was all it was going to take? Really?
One of those men has already pled guilty.
They think too highly of themselves, I do believe.
Well organized, just like the one that was coming on January the 6th. The men in Michigan even considered building Molotov cocktails to disarm.
I just need about 200 men. We'll take this whole
construct their own
Capitol
IEDs,
building.
Something
No
that
problem.
actually happened here on January 6th. Police authorities arrested extremists who had weapons and materials to build explosive devices, including one man found with an assault rifle and enough materials to make 11 Molotov cocktails. On September 17th, 2020, one of the Michigan conspirators posted, when the time comes, there will be no need to strike fear through presence. The fear will be manifested through bullets. And what did Donald Trump do as president of the United States to defend one of our nation's governors against a plotted kidnapping by violent insurrectionists? Did he publicly condemn violent domestic extremists who hoped and planned to launch a civil war in America? No, not at all. He further inflamed them by continuing to attack the governor who was the object of their hatred in this kidnapping conspiracy.
And they absolutely hate her.
The very night this
God damn the vitriol that you see towards that woman.
And that Governor Whitmer learned that there were 13 men who were planning to kidnap and likely kill her. Trump did not condemn the violence. He did not criticize the extremists. He didn't even check on Governor Whitmer's safety. He chose to vilify Governor Whitmer again, and then amazingly took credit for foiling the plot against her, demanding her gratitude. And then he quickly, of course, changed the subject to Antifa. He tweeted, Governor Whitmer has done a terrible job. He demanded that she thank him for the law enforcement operation that had foiled the kidnapping conspiracy that had been encouraged by his rhetoric. On October 17th, a little over a week after these people were arrested for preparing to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer, Trump riled up a boisterous crowd in Muskegon with more slashing personal attacks on Whitmer, driving the crowd to chant, lock her up, lock her up. He had now seen that some of his followers were prepared to engage in criminal violence with orchestrated attacks, deadly weapons, and willing bodies to storm a state capitol building and to attack his perceived political enemies. And so as the crowd chanted, lock her up, he pivoted to his next goal. He told them they couldn't trust the governor to administer fair elections in Michigan. He used a crowd that he knew would readily engage in violence to prepare his
And we're
followers
in the timeline, we're talking like May, June right now?
claiming the election was stolen and inciting insurrectionary action. And he did it again on October 27th during a pre-election rally speech in Lansing, Michigan, where the Capitol had been stormed. Trump openly joked with the crowd about critics saying his words had provoked the violent plot against Governor Whitmer. Check it out, it's telling.
We gotta get her going. I don't think she likes me too much.
No one should like you. You're a piece of shit.
I don't comment on that, because every time if I make just even a little bit of a nod, they say, the president led them on. No, I don't have to lead you on. Even a little nod, they say, the president said, your governor, at the urging of her husband, who has abused our system very badly, the only man allowed in the state of Michigan, the only man allowed to go sailing is her husband. No, your governor, I don't think she likes me too much. Hey, I'm the one, it was our people that helped her out with her problem. I mean, we'll have to see if it's a problem, right? People are entitled to say, maybe it was a problem, maybe it was. It was our people, my people, our people.
What, this was shortly before
So President Trump
he was
offered
diagnosed
them
with
a
coronavirus?
winking inside joke.
So he wouldn't have been on the
about
steroids just yet.
incitement of the mob and how much can actually be.
But I mean,
communicated
he's
by
been
him.
on some kind of
Just a
speed
little nod.
shit, and I'm sure he was on the
Just a
campaign
little nod.
trail.
He presided over another pounding, rhythmic rendition of his trademark chant, "Lock her up, lock her up." Then,
God, that would have been like,
referring to
what, a
FBI's
week before he got
foiling of the
diagnosed?
kidnapping conspiracy, which was deadly serious. He said that he helped her out with the problem. Maybe it was a problem, maybe it wasn't. We'll have to see. Maybe it was a problem, maybe it wasn't. The President of the United States of America. He could not bring himself to publicly oppose a kidnapping and potential assassination conspiracy plot against a sitting governor of one of our 50 states? Trump knew exactly.
Well, I've got no doubt he was on
in inciting the January 6th mob.
some sort of legal
Exactly.
speed.
He had just seen how easily his words and actions inspired violence in Michigan. He sent a clear message to his supporters. He encouraged planning and conspiracies to take over Capitol buildings and threaten public officials who refused to bow down to his political will. Is there any chance Donald Trump was surprised by the results of his own incitement?
Good Lord, no.
Let's do what Tom Paine told us to do. Use our common sense. The sense we have in common as citizens. If we don't draw the line here, what's next? What makes you think the nightmare with Donald Trump and his lawmaking and violent mobs is over? If we let him get away with it, and then it comes to your state capitol, or it comes back here again, what are we going to say? These prior acts of incitement cast a harsh light on Trump's obvious intent. Obvious intent. His unavoidable knowledge of the consequences of his incitement. The unavoidable knowledge of the consequences of his incitement and the clear foreseeability
I know,
of the
isn't he?
violent harm that he unleashed on our
He's just hanging out, looking out the
in our
window.
republic. January 6th was not some unexpected radical break from his normal
He's the sweetest
law-abiding
cat.
and peaceful disposition. This was his state of mind. This was his essential MO. He knew that, egged on by his tweets, his lies, and his promise of a wild time in Washington to guarantee his grip on power, his most extreme followers would show up bright and early, ready to attack, ready to engage in violence, ready to fight like hell for their hero. Just like
Oh,
they
he wants
did
back in my lap
in
now.
Michigan. President Trump has said over and over his supporters are loyal. In his own words, his supporters are the most loyal that we've seen in our country's history. And he knew that
I mean, that might be true.
supporters were willing to direct violence at elected officials, indeed to attack and lay siege
He
to a
most certainly
Capitol
is the leader of a cult.
and he knew they would be ready to heed his call on January 6th to stop the steal by using violence to block the peaceful transfer of power in the United States. He knew they were coming. He brought them here, and he welcomed them with open arms. We hear
Aw.
you and love you from the Oval Office. My dear colleagues, is there any political leader in this room who believes that if he is ever allowed by the Senate to get back into the Oval Office, Donald Trump would stop inciting violence to get his way? Would you bet the lives of more police officers on that? Would you bet the safety of your family on that? Would you bet the future of your democracy on that? President Trump declared his conduct totally appropriate.
Now, one of the things I would like to see is them play some
if he gets
clips
back
from
into
the
office
first
and it happens
impeachment
again,
of them saying
no
that
one to
if
blame
Trump is not convicted,
ourselves.
he will continue to escalate. Because I know those clips exist. Play a clip of Susan Collins saying she thinks
Who will
Trump has
return
learned
now
his
to say about
lesson.
President Trump's total lack of remorse after the insurrection.
Good afternoon. My colleagues walked you through President Trump's actions leading up to January 6th and then the horrific events on January 6th. And we saw both during the attack as well as in the days after the attack that this was a president who showed no remorse and took no accountability. In fact, quite the opposite. As Representative Raskin showed you, President Trump claimed
He was
his
into it.
actions were, quote, totally appropriate. Their assertion that everyone thought Donald Trump's actions were totally appropriate, including people in this room, is of course untrue. It is also dangerous. And that's why members of Congress and U.S. senators, former and current administration officials, state and local officials, all unequivocally confirmed what we witnessed with our own eyes, that Donald Trump's conduct was wrong, it was destructive, dishonorable, and un-American. President Trump's lack of remorse and refusal to take accountability during the attack shows his state of mind. It shows that he intended the events of January 6th to happen, and when it did, he delighted in it. President Trump's lack of remorse and refusal to take accountability after the attack poses its own unique and continuing danger. It sends the message that it is acceptable to incite a violent insurrection to overthrow the will of the people, and that a president of the United States can do that and get away with it. That is why we have to hold President Trump accountable, to send the message that it is never patriotic to incite a violent attack against our nation's capital, and that future presidents will know that they cannot follow in Donald Trump's footsteps and get away with it. So let's start with the day of
Well, you know, Representative Lou,
on insurrection.
had we held Bush accountable, we probably wouldn't have gotten Trump.
President Trump did not once.
Had we held Reagan accountable, we wouldn't have gotten W.
Even when he finally asked.
Had we held Nixon accountable, we wouldn't have gotten Reagan.
Which was 3 hours after attack.
So better late than never, I guess.
This video, and he ends it with, "You're very special. We love you." That was his message to people who perpetrated this violent, gruesome attack. We love you. And then 2 hours later, he tweets,
he told cop killers that he loves them.
"This is not a man who showed remorse." But it's worse than that. After that tweet, it took him another full day to even condemn the attack itself. The very next day, President Trump was eerily silent. And then at 7:01 p.m., he releases a pre-recorded video. And there, President Trump, for the first time, nearly 30 hours after the attack began, acknowledges and condemns the violence and mayhem that occurred. He said
that was a heavily edited video.
Filed the seed of American democracy.
I'm convinced that he said a lot more that we did not see.
And if they broke the law, they would pay. But even in that video, he says more lies. He says in that very same video that he immediately deployed the National Guard. That again is not true. The National Guard was not deployed until over 2 hours after the attack began at around 3 p.m. Because of this late deployment, the National Guard did not arrive until after 5 p.m. And when the Guard was deployed, the Pentagon had released a statement that showed the list of people, and you saw that list, of folks that were consulted.
Vice President
before deploying
Pence,
the National Guard.
Chuck Schumer,
Several
Nancy
people on that
Pelosi,
list,
Mitch
including the Vice
McConnell,
President. President Trump was not on that list.
Kevin McCarthy.
And you know, as a veteran, I find it deeply
It was
dishonorable.
the actual leaders of our government.
Did not protect us. And then later, he tries to take credit for something he failed to do. Shameful. Also in that video, you should note what it did not say. Absent from that entire video was any actual acceptance of responsibility for his actions. Absent from that video was a call to his most fervent supporters to never do this again. And here was his final message in that so-called condemnation of attack video. Here's what he actually said.
And to all of my wonderful supporters, I know you are disappointed, but I also want you to know that our incredible journey is only just beginning.
President Trump not only failed to show remorse or take accountability, he made clear he is just beginning. For days, he did not address the nation after this attack. We needed our commander-in-chief to lead, to unite a grieving country, to comfort us. But what did President Trump do? Nothing. Silence.
I don't even
Aware
want
that
to
a violent
contemplate that
mob
possibility.
Murdered a police officer. It took President Trump 3 days before he lowered the flag of the United States of America. 3 days.
And I mean, you just described like
President
the
Trump
absolute
was
most likely
commander-in-chief
scenario.
at the time. Did not
With the cards the way they are lined right now, the way everything is.
in the very building.
He's the front runner for the Republicans in 2024, and more than likely he would lose again.
Some people have argued that President Trump made a mistake, that he gets a mulligan.
I'm amazed we didn't
President Trump
see more violence at polling stations.
Because you see, when you or
This-
I make
this
a mistake
time.
and something very bad happens, we would show remorse. We would accept responsibility. President Trump didn't do any of that. Why not? Because he intended what happened on January 6th. And how do we know that? He told us. On January
Then
12th,
again, I
as
also
President Trump was boarding Air Force One to
I wouldn't doubt that he gets the COVID
saw this video
again.
before, and I'm going to show it again. He was asked by a reporter, quote, "What is your role in what happened at the Capitol? What is your personal
You think he's taking precautions now? He probably thinks he's immune.
My
And right about now is when the immunity is starting to wear off.
And everybody to the T thought it was totally appropriate.
3 to 6 months, supposedly.
On January 12th, President Trump had seen the violent attack on the Capitol. He knew the people that died. And his message to all of us was that
I understand.
was totally appropriate. I'm a former prosecutor, and we're trained to recognize
One of the greatest people I've ever known.
well, it doesn't take a prosecutor
The absolute
to understand
best,
that
one of the
President
best
Trump
men to
was
walk the
not showing
planet.
remorse. He was showing
Taken from us far too soon. Donald Trump,
He was
indestructible.
telling us that he would do this again.
Gets
that
a
he
deadly
would-
virus and still doesn't die.
That he and future presidents can run for national election, lose the election, inflame
That's how I know there is no
and
God.
incite an insurrection, and that would be totally appropriate. 1 week after the attack, on January 13th, President Trump, in response to continuing bipartisan criticism, releases another video. Here's part of what he said.
Chadwick Boseman dies.
Very clear.
Harvey Weinstein
I
still
unequivocally
alive.
condemn the violence that we saw last week. Violence and vandalism have absolutely no place in our country and no place in our movement.
Can't be a God.
President Trump, of course, had to make that statement. He needed to unequivocally condemn the attack. But he also needed to mean those words. You saw Donald Trump tweet endless attacks, sometimes 108 tweets in a day. And in public speeches and across rallies, repeating words of fight and...
Look at the lifespan of a puppy, or of a dog.
President Trump wants to convey...
There is no God.
Forcefully, loudly, and repeatedly, he does that. This video sent after a week of the attack was not that. And we know this because in this video, he again does not show remorse, does not take responsibility. He again does not acknowledge his role in the insurrection. He does not say in that video, for example, everything I said in the months prior went too far. And he does not say the one sentence that matters. He does not say the one sentence that would stop future political violence. The election was not stolen. He still hasn't said that sentence.
Then again, God wrote a book about, you know, an Antichrist. Wrote it 2,000 years ago and then sends Donald Trump to get all his followers.
Also confirm that President Trump believes
just be blatant hypocrites.
Forced by the bipartisan fear after the insurrection to acknowledge the new administration.
If there is a God, he's got a wicked sense of humor.
Because
the richest man in the world looks like Lex Luthor.
And behind closed doors, sources confirm that President Trump still refused to directly acknowledge his election loss to Joe Biden and refused to even attend the peaceful transition of power, the first president in modern history. President Trump even reportedly, while watching the impeachment vote, quote, focused his ire on the Republicans who voted for his impeachment, peppering aides with questions about what he could do to exact revenge. President Trump has made clear that if he is not held accountable...
And make no mistake about it, that is why the senators aren't going to vote to convict him.
Now,
they're afraid that
in the world,
even though it would expel him from the party,
it is important to impeach
and his ability to be able to run again, he would launch primary challenges at them.
That what
no matter how sycophantic they had been. Lindsey Graham has been up his ass for 4 fucking years. Lindsey Graham votes to impeach. He's going to throw a primary challenge at Lindsey Graham.
Former officials,
that's why they're scared to fucking death.
Have all unambiguously and passionately said that what Donald Trump did was, quote, disgraceful, shameful, and they've called his behavior existential and wrong. And they said that his actions gave rise to one of the darkest chapters in United States history. Let's hear what some of these officials had to say. Here are Governors Spencer Cox, Charlie Baker, Mike DeWine, Larry Hogan, and Phil Scott.
People have to be held accountable, and yes, that includes the president.
It's important to remember
Cox.
that they were the culmination of months of President Trump repeating,
get your mind out of the gutter,
over again, that the American electoral system is a fraud. After he stoked the flames of outrage for weeks leading up to the events of yesterday, he refused to adequately prepare the U.S. Capitol for the possibility...
I'm sorry, buddy. My leg is asleep. You're going to have to get up.
His remarks during and after the travesty of the attack on the Capitol were disgraceful.
President Trump's continued refusal to accept the election results without producing credible evidence of a rigged election has started a fire that has threatened to burn down our democracy. This incendiary speech yesterday, when he gave preceding the march that he gave to the protesters,
you want to come lay back down? Come on.
Fan those flames.
I proudly stood by my father's side at age 12 on the floor of the House chamber as we both took the oath of office, an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. It's clear to me that President Trump has abandoned this sacred oath.
Seeing our
it's clear to you now?
A symbol of democracy around the world stormed by an angry mob was heartbreaking. And let me be clear. These actions...
And who could have possibly seen this shit coming?
And these people are not patriots. The fact that these flames of hate and insurrection were lit...
That's, we went over that with the reason why they had to go through Mike Pence and Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, Kevin McCarthy, is because the National Guard was ready to respond and was wanting to be deployed, and the DOD was blocking the requests.
That President Trump incited this.
That's been one of my bones of contention with the Democrats, is they have not focused on that at all.
Declared that today's violent assault on our Capitol, an effort to subjugate American democracy by mob rule, was fomented by Mr. Trump. Former White House Chief of Staff John Kelly also spoke on this as well, and I'd like to play an audio clip of what he said.
What happened on Capitol Hill yesterday is a direct result of his poisoning the minds of people with the lies and the frauds.
But none of this matters to right-wingers. These are all part of the deep state that are just trying to take out Trump. This is all about hatred of Trump. Why do you hate Trump so much? Scrappy, why do you hate Trump so much?
With the lies and their fraud. Former Speaker of the House, John Boehner, declared that, quote, the invasion of our Capitol by a mob, incited by lies from some entrusted with power, is a disgrace to all who...
Oh, the new defense secretary's order.
This was...
It's like a 100-day order for them to be able to evaluate people.
Official.
Because they're wanting to root out white supremacists. Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, I was confused. My bad.
McMaster, former White House Communications Director Alyssa Farah, and former Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney said.
Let me just ask you, do you think President Trump has blood on his hands?
I think he does. Look, I agree with...
I think John Bolton has blood on his hands. Shit!
With the clear intention of having them disrupt the Electoral College certification and delay it to give him more time. I don't think there's any question about it.
You know, there are many reasons for this assault on the Capitol, but foremost among them was the president's exhortations, was the president's sustained disinformation. We've seen a president stoking fears amidst these crises.
And first and foremost, I want to say that what happened at the Capitol was unacceptable, un-American, undemocratic.
I think everybody recognizes that what happened on Wednesday is different. You can go down the long litany of things that people complained about.
Oh, fuck you, Mick Mulvaney.
Almost all of them. Many of them were policy differences. Many of them were stylistic differences. But Wednesday was different. Wednesday was existential. Wednesday is one of those things that struck to the very heart of what it means to be an American, and it was wrong.
Mick Mulvaney, President Trump's former Chief of Staff, is clearly saying what we all felt, that January 6th was different. It was existential. It was wrong. It was un-American. And this sentiment was echoed not just from people outside the administration, but from people inside the Trump administration. Perhaps most telling was the flood of resignations from people inside President Trump's administration with first-hand access to President Trump.
And I absolutely think that was to shirk their responsibility.
That numerous officials resigned.
People in the cabinet didn't want to have to invoke the 25th Amendment, so they resigned instead. You're looking at a group of cowards right now.
16. They all took.
These aren't courageous individuals.
Of resigning, because
these are people who rode the Trump train for as long as they thought they could.
And the violent insurrection.
And only jumped off when they thought it was untenable for them to stay on.
Who was in administration the entire term, told President Trump in her resignation letter that, quote, there's no mistaking the impact your rhetoric had on the situation, and it is an inflection point for me. Secretary Chow, who was in administration their entire term, explained, yesterday, our country...
Who was in the administration the entire term, who is Mitch McConnell's wife, who has enriched herself throughout this presidential administration.
As I'm sure is the case with many of you,
she's just now deeply troubled.
Me in a way I simply cannot set aside. Deputy Costello told his associates the attack was his, quote, breaking point, and he hoped, quote, a wake-up call. These rebukes and resignations from President Trump's own administration make clear that President Trump's conduct was anything but totally appropriate. They also remind us that this can and must be a wake-up call. As Representative Fred Upton so eloquently put it, President Trump expressed no regrets for last week's violent insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. This sends exactly the wrong signal to those of us who support the very core of our democratic principles and took a solemn oath to the Constitution. It is time to say, enough is enough. Now, no one is saying here that President Trump cannot contest the election. Of course he can. But what President Trump did, as his former chief of staff explained, was different. It was dishonorable.
He should be allowed to lie.
And it resulted in fatalities. President Trump spent months inflaming his supporters, spread lies.
And I've thrown it out there for like all political offices, they need to be under oath.
And not all of us.
But for the love of God, at least for the presidency, if they are standing in front of the seal, they should not be allowed to lie.
And that is why President Trump is so dangerous. Because he would have all of us, all Americans, believe that any president who comes after him can do exactly the same thing. That's why lack of remorse is an important factor in impeachment.
Hi, Maynard.
Because impeachment, conviction, and disqualification is not just about the past, it's about the future. It's making sure that no future official, no future president does the same exact thing President Trump does. President Trump's lack of remorse shows that he will undoubtedly cause future harm if allowed, because he still refuses to account for his previous high-grade crime against our government. You know, I'm not afraid of Donald Trump running again in 4 years. I'm afraid.
Good Lord, no. Yep.
Because he can do this again. We're in an unusual situation because despite President Trump's claim that everyone thinks what he did was fine, so many have come out and spoken so strongly and passionately about what happened here. I'd like to highlight a statement by Representative Anthony Gonzalez. He said, "The Vice President and both chambers of Congress had their lives put in grave danger as a result of the President's actions and the events leading up to and on January 6th. During the attack itself, the President abandoned his post while many members asked for help, thus further endangering all present. These are fundamental threats not just to people's lives, but to the very foundation of our republic." And now I'd like to show what members of Congress said leading up to the most bipartisan impeachment vote in U.S. history. Because I do want everyone watching, especially President Trump's supporters, to see firsthand what I believe we all feel, that what President Trump did was not appropriate, that it was not American, and that it absolutely cannot stand.
What he has done and what he has caused here is something that we've never seen before in our history.
All indications are that the president has become unmoored, not just from his duty, nor even his oath, but from reality itself.
That was the case years before that.
Both on social media ahead of January 6th and in his speech that day. He deliberately promoted baseless theories, creating a combustible environment of misinformation and division. To allow the President of the United States to incite this attack without consequences is a direct threat to the future of this democracy.
After this trial, I hope you'll come together and cast your vote and make absolutely clear how we as a Congress and as a nation feel about what Donald Trump did by convicting
So we should know the outcome by this time next week.
From being only the beginning, as President Trump said.
The vote is probably going to take place
who do not like the outcome of a national
on
election
Tuesday or
from
Wednesday.
believing they can follow in President Trump's footsteps. It is what our Constitution requires. It is what our country deserves.
Representative DeGette will now return to show how extremists were emboldened by the insurrection and plan to attack the inauguration.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Shit. That is absolutely true. Not only the inauguration, but they, the 16th or the 14th, they were trying to plan something?
My colleagues have showed you the overwhelming evidence of how President Trump's conduct assembled, incited, and inflamed the mob. We showed how and why this attack, this violence, was not only foreseeable, but preventable. We showed that President Trump knew his conduct could and would result in violence, and that when the attack occurred,
I don't know. It might be about time for me to switch to
fulfill
the
his
ball.
duty as commander-in-chief and defend us. Instead, he was delighted. Donald Trump incited a violent insurrection, and he failed
Excuse
to
me
defend
momentarily
our nation,
while
our Capitol,
I prepare
this
my
Congress,
utensils.
and our law enforcement from the attack he incited. Now I want to turn to the impact, the long-term harm of this conduct. My colleagues and I will walk through the breadth and gravity of this harm. I'd like to start with the effect President Trump's conduct had on our domestic security. We saw firsthand how Donald Trump's conduct emboldened and escalated domestic violence extremists. These folks are known in the law enforcement community as DVEs. These threats were and are made worse by President Trump's refusal to take accountability and his refusal to forcibly denounce what his own FBI identified as some of the most dangerous elements of our country. Even as the attack was underway, he tweeted words of support to his violent supporters. And then, in the aftermath on January 7th, President Trump made it clear this was only the beginning.
And to all of my wonderful supporters, I know you are disappointed, but I also want you to know that our incredible journey is only just beginning.
And he was right. Unless we take action, the violence is only just beginning. In the aftermath of the attack, we saw a huge rise in threats from domestic violent extremists, including specific threats to the inauguration in D.C. and also to all 50 state capitals. Our intelligence agencies confirmed that in addition to these specific threats, President Trump's conduct emboldened the very same violent groups who initiated the attack and sparked new violent coalitions. These groups believe that they're following his orders. They believe that their acts of insurrection and violence are patriotic. Violence is never patriotic, and it's never American. It's not the Democratic way, and it's not the Republican way. After the attack, the nation's top defense and law enforcement agencies reported an increase in credible threats to the inauguration from Donald Trump's supporters. On January 13, 2021, a joint intelligence bulletin issued by the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and the National Counterterrorism Center found, quote, since the 6th January event, violent online rhetoric regarding the 20 January presidential inauguration has increased, with some calling for unspecified, quote, justice for the 6th January fatal shooting by law enforcement of a participant who had illegally entered the Capitol building, and another posting that, quote, many armed individuals would return on 19 January. The agencies also made clear why these threats were escalating, especially regarding the inauguration. The report explained that a primary motivating factor was, quote, the shared false narrative of a stolen election and opposition to the change in control of the executive and legislative branches of the federal government may lead some individuals
Tea is refilled.
that there is
Bong
no
is
political
iced.
solution
I'm
to
here
address
for the law's
their
law.
grievances, and that violent action is necessary. In other words, President Trump's spreading of inflammatory disinformation about the election incited the insurrection on January 6th and may lead to further violence. Online,
I went to bed last
just
night.
as they did prior to the January 6th
I
attack,
took a bong rip. I finished off what was in my bong.
to organize and
I walk
document
into the bedroom.
desire and
As I
plans
get
for
finished
future
brushing my
violence
teeth, I walk
that
out.
President
The clock
Biden's
is on
inauguration.
4:20, and I'm like, well, shit.
And indeed,
So I walk back in here before into my bong, take another rip.
several posters on extremist social media websites made further plans for violence. They posted, quote, many of us will return on January 19, 2021, carrying our weapons in support of our nation's resolve, to which the world will never forget. We will come.
My plan was to play the Tony Hawk
standing Army
1
or
and 2
police
remake
agency
last
connect.
night, which I bought the other
Quote,
day.
we took the building once and we can take it again.
And I still haven't had a
Other
chance to play it.
users, eager to participate in additional attacks, confirmed that they were waiting on President Trump's instructions about what to do next. Referring to a future planned attack, a user on the online platform known as Gab posted, quote, I'd like to come do this, but want to know, does our president want us there? Awaiting instructions. In
Yes,
fact,
Trump wanted
in the
you
days
there.
leading up to the inauguration, multiple individuals, many potentially in an attempt to carry out the plots that I just previewed, were arrested in Washington, D.C., including on serious weapons charges. One of those men was Couy Griffin, the founder of Cowboys for Trump, who took part in the
Oh, this guy. I didn't know the
also
name off the
arrested
top of my
on
head.
January
Cowboys for
17th.
Trump guy.
Here's
Yeah,
what
we
he
played a
said
video of
today
him.
about his plans for violence.
You know, you want to say that that was a mob? You want to say that was a violence? No, sir.
I remember loving them when I was younger, in like my early 20s. I haven't played them since then.
You know, and if we do,
But the remakes are supposed to be really good, and they were on sale, so I was like, all right, I got them.
running out of that building, but at the end of the day, you mark my word, we will plant our flag on the desk of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer.
They did that.
Blood running out of the building. This building, the Capitol, where all of us are right now. Now, the name Couy Griffin may sound familiar because he previously faced controversy.
I called them a remaster.
Video,
Tony
where
Hawk
he said,
remaster.
quote, the only good Democrat is a dead Democrat. Hear it from him yourself.
Where I've come to the conclusion that the only good Democrat is a dead Democrat.
Now, when he said this,
And when you convince
Trump
yourself of your moral
actually
superiority,
retweeted Griffin and thanked
and you
him for that
dehumanize the other
sentiment.
side, you commit atrocities.
When Donald Trump retweeted this, he was no stranger to Griffin. In fact, in March 2019, over a year earlier, Griffin and Trump had spoken on the phone for nearly 30 minutes. President Trump's conduct, without a doubt, made it clear that he supported Griffin. In fact, Griffin even said so himself. As Griffin later said about President Trump retweeting his inflammatory comment about the dead Democrats, quote,
That's a repressed gay man, right? The Cowboy for Trump guy.
I know the President of the United States has my back. Remember, this is a man who was here on January 6th, who was arrested after threatening to come back here to make blood come running out of this building. Threats like Griffin's have triggered a deployment of forces, the likes of which we have never seen. There were approximately 25,000 National Guard troops brought in from around
What are the Democrats scared of?
D.C. leading up to and on Inauguration Day. As you know, many of those troops are still here. Take a look at that. These were scenes that played out all over the country. 5 days following the siege on the Capitol, on January 11, 2021, the FBI warned that, quote, armed protests are being planned at all 50 state capitals from 16 January through at least 20 January, and at the U.S. Capitol from 17 January through 20 January. As a result, at least 21 states
now, at least these all fizzled out.
Guards in preparation for potential attacks. President Trump's incitement has reverberated around the country, prompting massive law enforcement mobilization in several state capitals, including Washington, Illinois, Michigan, and Georgia. Look at these photos. This is what Donald Trump has done to America. This massive deployment of law enforcement has
No, they'll tell you that it's the Democrats that did it. It's their hatred of Donald Trump that did it.
Is expected to cost at least $400.
That's what the Party of Personal Responsibility will tell you.
Already also racking up in the states: North Carolina, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, Utah, and Wisconsin have each spent about $500,000 to safeguard their capitals in the run-up to the inauguration. Ohio spent $1.2 million over the same 2-week period. And remember, this is at a time when state budgets are already suffering under the weight of the pandemic. Our brave service
because Trump wouldn't,
thanks to
and
their
McConnell
dedication and their vigilance,
wouldn't bail out the states.
The inauguration and the days leading up to it mercifully proceeded without incident. In fact, after news broke of law enforcement's preparedness for further attacks, leaders of the Proud Boys, the Three Percenters militia, the organizers of the Million MAGA March, they all now told their followers to avoid protests up to or leading up to the inauguration for fear that law enforcement would crush them and arrest rioters who showed up. Thank God there wasn't an insurrection sequel here on January 20th. But look at the price we've paid. The price that we're still paying. It's not just dollars and cents. This Capitol has become a fortress, as state capitals have all across the country. Our constituents no longer have access to the elected representatives. Every Democrat and Republican, including people who came here on January 6th peacefully, is paying the price. And it's not just a loss of access. It's a dimming of their freedom. It's a dimming of all of our freedom. We must uphold our oaths, as the tens of thousands of law enforcement officers have done in the wake of January 6th. Because if we do not, President Trump's mob stands ready for more attacks. Now, this should be no surprise. Having a commander-in-chief who incites violence has given life to the existing violent groups he spent years cultivating and has inspired new coalitions among extremist groups who actually view January as a success.
I don't like the way she put that he cultivated.
President Trump's assemblage of his
We've had a
was
white
particularly
supremacy,
dangerous
neo-Nazi
because,
movement
quote,
in this country
in-person engagement
that's been
between DVEs
gurgling
and ideological goals during the Capitol
for half a century.
likely served to foster connections which may increase
But
DVEs'
really
willingness,
started coming to prominence in the
and
mid-90s.
motivation to attack and undermine a government they view as illegitimate. In
Make
other
no
words,
mistake about it, the Oklahoma City
This
Federal
bulletin
Building bombing,
by our own
the Murrow
intelligence
Building
committee
bombing,
was also confirmed by concrete evidence.
Waco, Texas,
Rioters
Ruby Ridge, all that
the
shit
January 6th attack on social media. They boasted about their
plays
success
directly into what we're seeing now.
and forcing members of Congress and the vice president to evacuate.
Up through the Bundys and
For
the
example, right-wing
in the Obama
provocateur
years.
Nick Fuentes. The day before the Capitol insurrection, Fuentes said this on his internet show.
What can you and I do to a state legislator besides kill him? Although we should not do that. I'm not advising that, but I mean, what else do you do, right?
Fuentes was at the Capitol on January 6th and praised the insurrection on a live stream as glorious and awe-inspiring. He later said, quote, "We forced a joint session of Congress and the vice president to evacuate because Trump supporters were banging down and then successfully burst through the doors." Fuentes was not the only provocateur to revel in the violence. According to Mike Dunn, a member of the Boogaloo Boys, an anti-government movement whose adherents helped to lead multiple groups in storming the Capitol, the Boogaloo Boys will be, quote, "working overtime to capitalize on the January 6th riots and hope it will lead to more action." They said, quote, "Just know there's more to come." Proud Boys members were bragging about the attack on the Capitol. One post on the Proud Boys Telegram channel said, "People saw what we can do. They know what we're up to. They know and they want in." The leader of the Proud Boys himself sent the same message. Enrique Tarrio said the Proud Boys would be active during Biden's presidency.
Enrique.
Tarrio stated, "You're definitely going to see more of us."
Who we found out is
Also
an
boasting
FBI informant
that the
of
attack
some
on our
sort.
Capitol is a boon
We
for
don't
their
know the
recruitment
exact
efforts. 3%
extent of
security
his
force leader
involvement,
Chris Hill says
but he's
been
some sort of
contacted by
narc.
several people interested in joining since the insurrection. And as one expert who focuses on domestic extremism, Jared Holt explained, by all measurable effects, this was a far-right extremist, one of the most successful attacks that they've ever launched. They're talking about this as the first stab in a greater revolution. And as indicated by
A
Mr.
revolution that they have been talking about for years.
Given them encouragement to
I've been
continue
warning about it.
and to
Anytime you see a right winger talk about how we're not a democracy,
also noted that
it all
these
plays into this
extremist
zeitgeist they've been
will
constructing.
unfortunately be targeting
We're not a democracy, we're a
minority
republic.
communities in the U.S. A January 27, 2021 DHS bulletin warned, quote, "Long-standing racial and ethnic tension of the sort that led to a man killing 23 people at an El Paso Walmart will continue to grow and motivate further attacks." The January 13 Joint Intelligence Bulletin report stated that in addition to the other types of violence listed, DVEs may be incited to carry out more violence, including violence against racial, ethnic, and religious minorities and associated institutions, journalists, members of the LGBTQ+ community, and other targets common among some DVEs. These prejudiced elements could be seen visibly in the crowd that attacked the Capitol. Pictured here is Robert Packer. Robert Packer is an avowed white supremacist and Holocaust denier who proudly wore that sweatshirt which states, quote, "Camp Auschwitz." These prejudiced elements could also be heard from the crowds.
Work brings freedom.
The insurrectionists that attacked the Capitol on January 6th hurled racial slurs, including...
I think the back of it said staff, if I remember correctly.
One officer described the trauma he experienced when the rioters seized the Capitol. He said, quote, "I'm a black officer. There was a lot of racism that day. I was called racial slurs, and in the moment, I didn't process this as traumatic. I was just trying to survive. I just wanted to get home, to see my daughter again. I couldn't show weakness. I finally reached a safe place, surrounded by officers. I was able to cry, to let it out, to attempt to process it."
Wow.
These extremist groups were emboldened because President Trump told them, repeatedly that their insurrectionist activities were the pinnacle of patriotism. Well, let today be the day that we reclaim the definition of patriotism. Impeachment is not to punish, but to prevent. We are not here to punish Donald Trump. We are here to prevent the seeds of hatred that he planted from bearing any more fruit. As my colleague showed, this was not the first time that President Trump inspired violence, but it must be the last time that he's given a platform to do so. This must be our wake-up call. We must condemn it because the threat is not over. President Trump refused to condemn this type of violence. Instead, over and over again, he's encouraged it. Our response must be different this time. We simply cannot sweep this under the rug. We must take a united stand, all of us, that this is not American. Think back to August 2017, when a young woman was murdered during a white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, West Virginia. Her name was Heather Heyer. Her mother's name is Susan Breaux. Ms. Breaux has been a steadfast advocate for her daughter's memory. In a 2018 interview, she expressed concern that people had rushed too quickly to reconciliation without accountability.
If you rush to heal, if you rush to everybody grab each other and sing Kumbaya, then we've accomplished nothing and we'll be right back here in a few years.
We will be right back here in a few years. Those were her words in 2018, 3 years ago. Her daughter's murderer, he was held to account. But our nation did not impose any meaningful accountability on a president who at the time said that there were very fine people on both sides. And now where are we 3 years later? I'd argue we're not just back where we were. I would argue things are worse. In 2017, it was unfathomable to most of us to think that Charlottesville could happen. Just as it was unfathomable to most of us.
I don't know. It wasn't unfathomable at all.
Reached on January
Anyone
6th.
who was paying attention.
Frankly,
That wasn't unfathomable in
force
any
await us.
stretch of the
We must
imagination.
Stand up now and say, no, this is not America. And we will not just express condolences and denunciations. We won't just close the book and try to move on.
I wrote a movie, or at least a treatment for a movie, in 2014
This
called
never
14 Words.
Again.
So I was not shocked that 3 years later there was a neo-Nazi rally
Representative Cicilline and Liu
around a statue of Robert E. Lee.
Done, and the damage done to Congress and our democratic process. Mr. Cicilline.
So if it follows like it did yesterday, they've been doing about 2-hour blocks. They'll take about a 15-minute recess
President,
after this presentation.
Distinguished senators, you just heard from my colleague, Manager DeGette, how the conduct of Donald Trump dramatically increased the threats to our security and emboldened violent domestic extremists. I'd like to now turn to the harm that was caused here, inside these walls, as a result of the conduct on January 6th. The harm to us, to Congress, to those who serve our country, and to the constitutional processes as the Trump mob tried to stop the election certification process. The attack on January 6th was one of the bloodiest intrusions in the Capitol since the British invaded in the War of 1812 and burned it to the ground. And you've heard in painstaking detail that the president's mob posed an immediate and serious threat to the continuity and constitutional succession of the United States government. as the first, second, and third in line to the presidency, the vice president, the Speaker of the House, the President pro tem, were all together and faced a common threat in the same location. And we've seen the first and the second were purposely targeted by these attackers. These weren't idle threats. The mob, as you have heard, chanted, "Hang Mike Pence."
Hang Mike Pence! Hang Mike Pence! Hang Mike Pence! Hang Mike Pence!
The charging documents show that the rioters said they would have killed Vice President Pence and Speaker Pelosi had they found them. Dawn Bancroft and Diane Santos Smith, two of the rioters charged in the attack, were caught on tape discussing the brutal violence that they hoped to inflict on Speaker Pelosi had she not been rushed out to safety. They said, quote, "We broke into the Capitol. We got inside. We did our part. And we were looking for Nancy to shoot her in the frigging brain, but we didn't find her," end quote. Senators, simply put, this mob was trying to overthrow our government. And they came perilously close to reaching the first three people in line to the presidency. It wasn't just the vice president and the speaker. Rioters were prepared to attack any member of Congress they found. Thomas Edward Caldwell, Donovan Ray Kroll, and Jessica Marie Watkins, three militia members, were also charged for their role in the attack. They discussed trapping us inside the underground tunnels. The indictment quotes social media chatter with Caldwell, quote, "All members are in the tunnel under Capitol. Seal them in. Turn on gas. All legislators are down in the tunnels, 3 floors down. Do like we had to do when I was in the Corps and start tearing out floors, go from top to bottom," end quote. Never did any of us imagine that we or our colleagues would face mortal peril by a mob riled up by the President of the United States, the leader of the free world. But we did. All because Donald Trump could not accept his election defeat. Trump chose himself above the people, above our institutions, above our democracy, above all.
Now remember, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz,
Trump
and
espouse
others
for years now this America First policy.
in protest are reading or doodling
America's well-being. It's not country first.
or refusing to watch the
Our
presentation.
dear departed colleague John McCain. No, his directive is Trump first. No matter the cost, no matter the threat to our democracy. But each and every one of us in this room must agree on one thing. We can never allow the kind of violent attack that occurred on January 6th to ever happen again in this country. In the immediate aftermath, we heard really disturbing accounts from many members of Congress about what they experienced that day. Here are some of those reactions. Following the attack, Representative Dusty Johnson expressed concerns that we had gotten to the point where so many of us had sown the seeds of anger and division.
We were barricaded, and there was some fear, to be sure, but overwhelmingly the emotion that I experienced was one of anger. I just could not believe that this was happening. I could not believe that we had gotten to this point where so many of us had sown these seeds of anger and of division. And
Pretty much.
We had built this powder keg, and really we were starting to see this powder keg light up, and it was, frankly, I was furious.
Representative Jason Crow compared the events of this
I just
day
can't
to
believe
his
how
time
childish
in
and
Afghanistan
petty they
as an Army
are.
Ranger, something Senator Reid knows something about.
What I felt in the Capitol behind us is something that I haven't felt since I was in Afghanistan as an Army Ranger. And to think that as a member of Congress in 2021, in the U.S. Capitol on the House floor, that I was preparing to fight my way out of the People's House against a mob is just beyond troubling.
Representative Pat Fallon was humbled.
And make no mistake about it, Rand Paul's a coward. He probably shit himself
The event says surreal as they
on January the
during
6th.
the Capitol.
It was something that I just never thought I'd see this in our nation's capital, and particularly in the House chamber. It was surreal when it was unfolding. Well, you know, what was interesting was the bravery and the courage of some of my fellow members. When we got to a point where the mob was banging on the doors, and all that kept them from breaching the chamber itself was the doors and then some furniture that we had moved and some Capitol Police, and they needed to be augmented. And so Tony Gonzalez, a new freshman rep from Texas, and Ronnie Jackson and Troy Nels and Mark Wayne Mullen stepped in, and we broke off furniture. Some of the hand sanitizer stations are on these big giant poles, wooden poles, and we turned them upside down, and we were ready to actually have the street fight in the House chamber. It was unbelievable.
Many members that day wondered if they would ever see their families again. As the rioters breached the Capitol and they were outnumbered and trapped inside, they were calling loved ones to say goodbye. Representative Dan Kildee.
Okay, I'm sorry.
How he described the impact of the riot on him.
I was laying on the floor, trying to,
Nothing should surprise me. You're right.
Wall, and we all took our pins off because we're certain that if this mob were to come in, that would not be a good thing for them to quickly, easily be able to identify us as members of Congress. And I called my wife, and it wasn't until I heard her voice that I thought, wow, this is like one of those calls you hear about.
While most coverage is focused on the extreme danger posed to members and the Capitol Police who were targets of this attack, there were lots of other people in the Capitol working on January 6th as well. From personal aides to floor employees, cleaning staff, food service workers. We can't forget all the people that were in harm's way that day. These employees experienced trauma, some coward hiding in places just feet away from where this rabid crowd had assembled. Many were just kids, 20-somethings, who came here to work because they believed in their country.
The story about Nancy Pelosi's staffers
Others were
knowing how to barricade themselves because they learned it in school. That's fucking stunning. I can't believe we live in that country.
Of the legislative branch.
I'm sorry, I need to stop saying I can't believe things.
You've already heard from Speaker Pelosi's staff, the staff that was hiding under the conference table, cowering in the dark, making sure that the attackers couldn't hear them. But I'd like to share with you what some other staffers went through. Listen as two staffers recall what they experienced that day.
But then we were seeing on Twitter, on our phones, and then and hearing from some of the police officers on the floor that the building had been breached. Building breached, those were two words I had never heard.
That was particularly stressful, being in a room close to where things are happening and not really knowing what was happening, and seeing it come in live and getting texts from people, are you okay? And truthfully, I didn't know what was happening. I heard shots fired, shots fired, shots fired, show me your hands, show me your hands. Then I did not know if they were right outside, if they were lots of people with weapons, if there were one shooter, if they had, I didn't know what it looked like. I just knew that there were shots fired outside of the House chamber.
According to reports, one Republican Senate staffer whose office was not far from the floor, quote, took a steel rod and barricaded his door as the rioters banged on his door trying to break in. The New York Times also reported that a senior black staffer was under lockdown for 6 hours during the insurrection, was so disturbed about these events that she quit her job. Another staffer who was on the floor of the House that day described that what happened on January 6th still echoes in his mind. Listen to him describe the moments just before this indelible image.
I heard glass break, and I could see the the window panes on the house main door start to pop. And I figured that, obviously I knew they were at the door, and they figured out a way to break the glass. And the last thing I remember before I walked off the floor was several of the police officers had drawn their guns and had their guns trained on the door. Clearly that was, I didn't think there was anything else I could do, and I didn't want to be there for whatever was about to occur. So I got to the top of the stairs. The stairway was pretty packed, and right about that point, I don't know whether it was a police officer or somebody else said, "They're right behind us, run." For me, the thing that I keep thinking about, and again, there isn't a day that hasn't gone by since January 6th that at some point in the day I haven't kind of gone back and picked at some little thing, but the sound of those window panes popping, I won't forget that sound.
And I was arguing with somebody that was like, well, they shot an innocent person.
How long?
She wasn't innocent. She was trying to break into where Congress people were.
And he isn't alone. There are countless
The Capitol Police were doing their job.
With the trauma of what happened that day. This includes, by the way, another group of people who were with us in the Capitol on that day, and that's the press. They were in danger, particularly after years of being derided by President Trump as fake news. Kristen Wilson, a reporter for CNN, recently tweeted about her experience. She said, "I have 14 people on my team. We were scattered everywhere. 2 of them were on crutches and couldn't have run if they had to. They had to anyway. 1 was trapped in the House chamber and had to crawl out to hide. 4 of us barricaded ourselves in a room off the Senate chamber. Every bang on the door of them trying to come through, I can still hear in my head." The janitorial and custodial staff of the Capitol, the people who day after day tend to our home away from home, were also traumatized. But we don't talk about them and the harm they suffered often enough. One janitorial worker recounted how he was so scared that he had to hide in a closet during the attack. He said, quote, "I was all by myself. I didn't know what was going on," end quote. Another employee, a mother of 3, said, "The insurrection shattered all my sense of security at work." And an employee of the Capitol said, quote, "I hope nothing else happens because these people were talking about killing us, killing federal employees, killing police." Another employee was afraid to work on Inauguration Day, said, quote, "I honestly fear for my life. I've got 2 children at home," end quote. For many of the black and brown staff, the trauma was made worse by the many painful symbols of hate that were on full display that day. Insurrectionists waved Confederate flags and hurled the most disgusting racial slurs at dedicated Capitol workers. Then after all of that, these same workers, many of them people of color, were forced to clean up the mess left by mobs of white nationalists. One member of the janitorial staff reflected how terrible he felt when he had to clean
the historical
up feces that had been smeared on the wall, blood of a
significance of that flag being in that Capitol.
Strewn all over the floor. He said, "I felt bad."
It's just astounding.
Let's also not forget that this violent attack happened in the middle of a global pandemic. Social distancing was impossible as we were hiding for our lives in cramped quarters for long periods of time. Since January 6th, at least 7 members who hid with other members of Congress have tested positive for COVID-19. At least
and we know 1 congressperson died.
Have either tested positive or been exposed. And nearly 200 National Guard troops who were deployed to our nation's capital to provide all of us protection have tested positive. The Capitol Police and the National Guard came here to keep us safe, to serve, and they put their lives in danger. They deserved better than this. We all did. That brings me to the next harm. Now, all of us in this room made it out alive, but not everyone was so lucky. 3 law enforcement officers tragically lost their lives as a result of the riot on January 6th. These officers, Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, Capitol Police Officer Howard Liebengood, and Metropolitan Police Officer Jeffrey Smith, all honorably served to protect and defend. My colleague, Mr. Swalwell, told you about Officer Sicknick. He was a 42-year-old military veteran who dedicated his entire life to public service. On January 6th, he fought a mob of rioters as they streamed into the Capitol and ultimately lost his life protecting us. Officer Liebengood was a 15-year veteran of the Capitol Police. His father served as Sergeant-at-Arms here in the Senate, and Officer Liebengood followed his extraordinary example of public service. Officer Smith served for 12 years with the Metropolitan Police Department. He heeded the call of duty on January 6th by coming to stand with the Capitol Police to help secure our democracy. Earlier, my colleague, Manager Swalwell, showed you terrible videos of the police being physically abused and injured. You remember what happened to Officer Fanone and Officer Hodges of the MPD, but there were scores of other officers whose names we don't know who were also brutalized that day. Injuries to the U.S. Capitol Police and the Metropolitan Police Department include concussions, irritated lungs, serious injuries caused by repeated blows from bats, poles, and clubs. Capitol Police officers also sustained injuries that will be with them for the rest of their lives. One officer lost the tip of a right index finger. In a statement issued on January 7th, the chairman of the Capitol Police Officers Union said, and I quote, "I have officers who were not issued helmets prior to the attack, who have sustained brain injuries. One officer has 2 cracked ribs and 2 smashed spinal discs. One officer is going to lose his eye, and another was stabbed with a metal fence stake," end quote. In total,
by the Blue Lives crowd,
1 members of Capitol Police and 65 members of the Metropolitan Police Department were injured during the attack on January 6th.
The people that say they're for law and order.
Police Chief Son described the insurrection as violent, unlike anything he'd seen in his 30-year career.
The people that say they believe in the Constitution,
DC Police Chief,
who are trying to stop a constitutional proceeding.
With an officer who had been beaten and injured with a stun gun, said,
It's
quote,
almost like right-wingers are fucking morons.
done 2 tours in Iraq.
And if they say something to you, you should automatically assume that the opposite is true.
Of course, the physical violence is not the only thing that will have a lasting effect on our brave sworn officers. Trump's mob verbally denigrated their patriotism, questioned their loyalty, and yelled racial slurs. They called them traitors, Nazis, un-American for protecting us. For example, in the next clip, a rioter wearing a hunting jacket accosts a police officer.
Are you an American? Act like something that you don't. You don't have no idea what the fuck you're doing. You guys have no idea what the fuck you're doing. Now, once again, you're Americans. Now, what idea? Don't touch me, bro. Get the fuck out of here. Don't touch me.
Damn, I had not seen that.
No, they work for us. Fuck them.
It was non-violent, and Antifa and BLM was totally violent.
Mob talked to these officers.
And the Democrats encouraged BLM and Antifa.
Their own ears.
And the media said it was non-violent, even though it was totally violent. And all that doublespeak is Orwellian. I don't know. I lost the point there. I went way far off the deep end.
Effing traitor. So much for backing the blue. There's a couple more examples.
Notice the Blue Lives Matter flag, like right over this guy's shoulder.
1776, bitch! You're running out of pepper spray, officers.
They call
everyone with their phones out.
Officers traitors. You have to wonder, who are these rioters sworn?
Calling law enforcement officers traitors while they are literally committing treason.
To the Constitution?
Can't make this shit up. Projection.
Even those who were not outwardly injured, the mental toll has been significant. Several Capitol Police officers have reportedly threatened.
The country was hurt in its feels that day.
Following the riot, and in one case, an officer voluntarily turned in her gun because she was afraid of what might happen. Black police officers were also met with racist vitriol. You heard lead manager Raskin reference a black police officer who, weary from racialized violence that he had experienced that day, saying, "Tears just started streaming down my face. I said, what the F, man? Is this America?" Is this
Yes.
America, lead manager Raskin asked.
Have you read a history book? Yes.
Is this America?
Yes, it is.
What is your answer to that question?
This is America.
If not, what are we going
Childish Gambino wrote a song about it.
These people matter. These people who risk their lives for us. So I ask you respectfully to consider them, the police officers, the staff of this building, when you cast your vote. These people are in deep pain because they showed up here to serve the American
And the
people.
fact that the Republicans are going to vote to acquit him
Each of you, when you cast your vote, to
just
remember
feeds
them,
back into the idea that, yes, this is indeed America.
act in service of them as they deserve. I also want to recognize that 4 individuals, 4 insurrectionists, who also lost their lives during the attack. These people were led here by the words and actions of an individual who made them believe that they were.
Several of them hilarious. Like the woman with the "Don't Tread on Me" flag that got trampled to death.
Most consequential. But that was not the only damage.
Or the dude that may or may not have tased himself in the balls and had a heart attack.
Damaged this building. They defiled some of the most sacred places. The Statuary Hall, the Rotunda, where some of America's greatest champions, presidents,
The family denies that he tased himself in the balls.
heroes, and other defenders are honored after their
He
death.
did indeed die of a heart
This
attack.
violent mob had little respect for this place. This video shows the wreckage left in the Senate parliamentarian's office by the insurrectionists.
But the story is that the taser was in his pocket. He was trying to steal a painting, tased himself in the balls, and had a heart attack. Wow, they really did wreck the place.
A bust of President Zachary.
And also the security risk
to be blood.
that they put everybody
Picture
at.
frame, presumably robbed of its contents, was
At.
found on the floor. And videos of the insurrection captured one man stealing a framed photo, another one tearing a scroll from the wall and ripping it up and throwing those pieces on the floor.
Supposedly they had to throw away pretty much all the electronics.
It was also shamefully destroyed, and only a broken piece of the memorial was found on the ground next to a trash.
Because anything could be compromised.
Photo of Mr. Lewis.
Anything that had an electrical plug
The
on
damage
it
done to this building
had
is
to
a
be
stain
inspected.
on all of us and on the dignity of our democracy. The attack we saw had a purpose: stop the certification, stop our democratic process. Fortunately, they did not prevail. Newspapers across America on January 21st, the day after the inauguration, proclaimed democracy has prevailed. President Biden said that in his inauguration speech. The headline was in so many places because the world's oldest constitutional democracy and the principles underlying it had been attacked and challenged. This wasn't just an attack on the Capitol building and the dedicated people inside. It was an attack on what we were elected to preserve, our democracy.
I mean, if we were truly a
Attack on our
democracy,
elections, on the peaceful transfer
wouldn't
of
Bernie
power
Sanders
from
be
one
our
person
president
to
at the
next.
moment?
Didn't even happen during the Civil War. But it did just happen because of the cold, calculated, and conspiratorial acts of our former President, Donald J. Trump. We showed you that the insurrectionists were deliberate, that they came looking for Vice President Pence and Speaker Pelosi, ready to kill. When President Trump incited a lawless mob to attack our process, he was attacking our democracy. He was trying to become king and rule over us against the will of the people.
Exactly.
The results of the election. For the first time ever in our history, a sitting president actively instigated his supporters to violently disrupt the process.
Squeaked by, barely intact.
From one president to the next. Think about that for a moment. What if President Trump had been successful? What if he had succeeded in overturning the will of the people in our constitutional
He'd be a dictator right now.
Who among us is willing to risk that outcome by letting Trump's constitutional crimes go unanswered?
44 senators, at least.
Constitution, not as a punishment, but to prevent. We have to prevent every president, today, tomorrow, or at any time in the future, from believing that this conduct is acceptable. Today, we have to stand up for our democracy and ensure we remain a country governed by the people.
It would never, ever happen. A Democrat would never do anything like this.
And people all across this country and all across the world.
Because Democratic voters hold Democrats accountable.
And cannot
stand. The Democratic Party holds people accountable. A lot of times unwarranted.
The Senate will stand in recess.
I ask unanimous consent the House stand in recess for 15 minutes.
All right, so they're going to take a recess.
Without objection, the Senate will stand in recess.
Walk in the front door after the longest day of work and the neighbor's Shih Tzu dug into your It would never in a million years happen. The Republicans would have... I mean, they impeached Clinton over a blowjob, lying about it. Never would have happened. All right, I'm going to take a break. Unlike yesterday, I'm not going to try to go the distance without eating. I'm going to go ahead and take a break. I might not be back exactly when they start.
15-minute recess.
But once I come back, I will be here for the duration. So we will see you momentarily here on the Troll Patrol. Live.
Managers have